Morning. The time is now 9:40 a.m. and a quorum of the board is present. The State Board of Education special meeting of August 18th, 2025 is now called to order. And we'll start with an approval of the agenda in the order of priority. If we can have a motion. Are
So
there
move.
Support.
any discussion?
Bullock,
Yes.
Lipton,
Yes.
McMillan,
Yes.
Pritchett, Pugh,
Yes.
Robinson? Snyder? Yes. And Tilly?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you, Liz. And if you could introduce the board members.
Of course. Good morning. You have just been listening to Dr. Pamela Pugh, Board President of the State Board of Education. To her left around the table is Board Co-Vice President, Ms. Ellen Cogan Lipton from Huntington Woods, NASB Delegate, Dr. Mitchell Robinson from Okemos, Ms. Nikki Snyder, and Board Secretary, Dr. Judith Pritchett from Washington Township. Now seated to my right is Mr. Tom McMillan from Oakland Township, Board Treasurer, Mr. Marshall Bullock from Detroit, and Board Co-Vice President, Ms. Tiffany Tilley from West Bloomfield. Lastly, seated behind Ms. Ellen Cogan Lipton is Ms. Emma Young, the Governor's K-12 Policy Advisor ex officio.
Thank you. The public may register to provide comment, and we welcome those comments during the public participation portion of the meeting. Today, it will be at approximately 5 o'clock p.m. So those wishing to make public comment must register before 5 p.m. To provide public comment by telephone, please complete the registration form on the MDE webpage, which can be found at michigan.gov/MDE. To provide public comment in person, please complete a green public comment form as you arrive at the meeting location. And those instructions are listed also on the MDE webpage. So again, we welcome everyone here, and today is our first day of that the State Board of Education will be doing interviews. And today we have 4 candidates for our next superintendent of public instruction. And we would like to welcome our consultant from HYA to provide an overview of the process and give the State Board of Education instructions for the day. Thank you, Connie.
Good morning.
Welcome.
It's indeed a pleasure to be here, and welcome to all of the board members as well as anyone who may be listening virtually. I will just give a brief overview of what will be happening from this point going forward.
And if you can state your name, because I
Yes.
didn't do that, and your role with HYA.
Definitely. Connie Collins, and I'm one of the senior associates with Hazard Young Atia and Associates. We also have working with us Dr. Mike Ritchie, who is not able to be here today, and Dr. Max McGee, who is president of HYA, and he will be joining us later today. So without further ado, we will move forward. 7 of the 34 applicants have been identified as semifinalists. 4 of the 7 candidates will be interviewed by the board today, and the remaining 3 candidates will be interviewed by the board tomorrow. The interviews will be 90 minutes in length, and each candidate will be asked the same questions during this round of interviews. Each board member has the option to use a scoring rubric, which HYA has provided and is reflective of the leadership profile report desired characteristics. During this round of the interview process, all candidates will be asked the same questions. Following the last candidate interview tomorrow, we are hopeful that the board is able to narrow the candidate pool to 2 or 3. Please remember that the primary purpose of the 2 days of interviews is to select 2 to 3 candidates as finalists, one of whom will ideally become Michigan's next state superintendent. That is an overview of the process.
And so we appreciate that and we thank you. And we're ready for our first candidate. We have Dr. Paul Salah, and we would like to welcome Dr. Salah to the table. Good morning.
Morning. Morning, everyone. So quiet in here. Good to see you. Good to see you again. Good morning. Good to to see you. I'm Paul. Nice to meet you. Good morning. Good morning.
Oh.
Liz, good to see you again.
Nice to see you.
Good morning. Good to meet you. Good morning. Everybody doing okay today?
We are doing okay. And
This is a big table.
it is. And as you get yourself situated, I'll just give some instructions and, well, reminders to board members that we will go around the table and ask questions. Your initials are next to the questions that each board member will ask the candidate. And before we begin, Dr. Salah, do you have any questions?
No, I think I'm ready to roll whenever you're ready to roll.
Okay, and then hopefully we are saying your name right, because I've heard it pronounced different ways, so.
I'm used to that.
And what do you prefer?
Salah.
Salah. Okay,
Salah.
so we're off to a good start. So I will ask the first question, and it's three parts. If you can tell us about a time when you had to make a difficult ethical decision in your leadership role. The second part is, what was the situation? What did you do? And what was the outcome? I'm sorry, that was four parts, and I can repeat at any time if you want me to.
Sure, I'd love to hear it one more time.
Okay. Tell us about a time when you had to make a difficult ethical decision in your leadership role. What was the situation? What did you do? And what was the outcome?
Sure. So I would say one of the most tumultuous times to lead as a local superintendent was during the global pandemic. It was certainly not something that I expected, signed up for, nor would any sort of university programming train you to be ready for a situation like that. And people were hurting, communities were hurting, people were mourning in their personal lives. They were feeling great loss and suffering. And much of that, as many of you all know, played out on the national stage and in our local school districts. One of the most difficult things that I had to do as superintendent was manage those week-to-week changes as it related to health orders. And I will tell you, I struggled immensely with some of those questions because some of it didn't even make sense to me as a superintendent. I knew I had to follow the law. I knew I needed to do what was in the best interest of students and try to keep everybody as safe as possible. But you can understand, I mean, as a thinking person, sometimes it's difficult to understand why certain decisions are made. And so, you make the best ethical decision that you can, and then you move forward. And so in my instance, if I can just use masking as an example, I would say I was deeply criticized for following the mask mandates. To the point where, our school district ended up, being the recipient of a lawsuit for following said directives. So I would say the ethical dilemma was following said directives. The byproduct was we followed the law as we needed to do, and the outcome was a lawsuit. But what I will say that I learned through that process was that time period was a reaction from a hurting community, and it wasn't personal. And, I had the opportunity actually to teach a class on this topic at NASB as well as MASB. And I was given an opportunity to write an article in the MASB newsletter on this very topic. And it was titled "Removing Political Ideology from the Equation, Focusing on Partnership with Your Local School District." And it just kind of documents and walks through the difference between communication, cooperation, and collaboration. And what our community was asking for at the time was they wanted collaboration, which means to build something new. But where we were at as a country, as a state, was we just needed cooperation. We needed to get through what it was we were being what it was that we were dealing with as a state and as a nation.
Thank you.
The next question is with respect to visionary and outcomes-oriented question. What is your vision for public education in Michigan over the next 5 years? And how would you ensure measurable improvement in student outcomes statewide?
Okay. I appreciate that question. Thank you for turning that on. I could barely hear. Generally speaking, so I've spent time in a special education classroom as a building principal at a central office level, as a associate superintendent of the largest county in the state of Michigan, most diverse county, serving 280,000 students, 110 PSAs, 32 locally governed school districts, and as a local superintendent. And here's what I will share with you that I have learned over that 25-year time period. After about 12 to 15 years of being an educator, what I found happening in the educational literature is a repeat. Different authors, same themes. And after studying what successful states and what successful school districts are doing, it comes down to really 4 key elements. And so for a moment, if you could just envision with me a flight of stairs. Imagine trying to jump from the bottom platform to the top platform without taking any of the steps to get up. It's very difficult to do that. So what I have found that successful school environments need, and this is what I would propose that we are doing to a degree but could improve upon as a state, is the first stair step, the very first element is it's the culture, it's the climate, it's the people, it's the systems. In the absence of culture, climate, people, systems, it's almost impossible to accomplish any of the goals and objectives that are paramount to your success. So, I recently read the U of M study that has been cited at this table many times. And one of the things that it identified, which I agree with completely, is that MDE has brilliant minds, wonderful people working here who care and are compassionate and working hard on behalf of students. But it doesn't have enough people, and it's heavily dependent upon federal funds in order to make it operate, which makes it primarily a compliance organization. So the culture, climate, people, systems, that's something measurable that we would have to be thinking about over the course of the next 5 years in that first stair step. Second stair step is a guaranteed and viable curriculum that is consistent and appropriate across the entire school, the district, or the state. I applaud the efforts of the Michigan Department of Education, most recently with its literacy work, identifying a clear list of best practices literacy curriculum that can be implemented, giving local school districts some defined autonomy. So you have choice. One of these tools would be best for you, and it allows for consistency and uniformity across the state. So that's the second stair step model, second in the stair step. And in terms of how we measure that, well, achievement will be critical. Measuring the number of employees that have participated in letters training, that know and understand the science of reading research. So the clear measurables over the next 5 years would be training and improvements in achievement. That's ultimately what we need to see in the state. The third in the stair step model is what data are we using to determine whether or not the culture, the climate, the people, the systems, and the resources we're adopting are yielding the outcomes? And then the fourth step is what do we do to enrich and or intervene for children that have mastered the content or are struggling? And I think we can measure those elements rather easily if we have systems in place that align between the department, the 56 ISDs that are oftentimes boots on the ground, working closely in partnerships with our local school districts, developing matrices to help us determine readiness and implementation, and then wrapping around our supports for locals to ensure that we accomplish those goals. I know that was long-winded, and I promise I won't do every question that way, but I really wanted to frame how I think about successful school environments as a holistic approach.
How has your experience as an educator informed your approach to system-level leadership? Share an example where your teaching and educational leadership experience influenced a district or state policy.
Sure. So a couple examples here that I'm sort of rolling around. I'll run with, so this one. So when I moved from Wayne Westland Community Schools to Wayne Risa, the intermediate school district, my charge as a associate superintendent for Wayne County Risa was to take a group of highly skilled individuals with an incredible breadth of knowledge and help them with the systems aspects of the work, okay? So what I found when I started at the ISD was we basically had, from an instructional perspective, we had two large groups of people duplicating the work. But they were not coordinating the work. So we had a group that was primarily focused on regional assistance grant support and a group that was focused on all non-regional assistance grant support. But here's the thing, best practice is best practice. So we had a group doing work for the RAG schools, and we had a group doing the work for the non-RAG schools. It was counterintuitive, and the organization recognized that. That's why it became my charge, was to combine these two highly skilled groups of people to integrate systems that were not duplicating efforts. And so we created something we call the district study team. And so if you think of a pyramid of intervention, okay, oftentimes we hear tier 1, tier 2, tier 3. So think of it in those terms. A pyramid of intervention where the base level is core. So what most school districts will be successful with is professional learning on a frequent and ongoing basis, data tools to help them look at and interpret assessment results, guidance documents to help provide them guidance regarding how to implement certain policies. So 60, 70% of districts are fine with that level of support. The second tier is what we called supplemental. So if you think Title I, Title I is designed to supplement the core instructional program. So Title I, 31A, additional resources, IDEA, additional resources to help children from an equity perspective, give them what they need to be successful. That's above and beyond the core. And then finally, intensive partnerships. So at the ISD, we actually had a team of experts that would push into a local school district that was really struggling from the stair-step model, the culture, climate, people systems, guaranteed and viable curriculum, how to use data, and MTSS, and support that district with implementation design around those 4 steps. So that was a huge undertaking for me for me and the team as an associate superintendent. And I didn't think of, those pieces on my own. Like, we spent hours and hours and hours as a Wayne Risa team. We engaged assistant superintendents from local school districts. We engaged superintendents in these conversations, and it ultimately culminated in a process by which we would support the 32 school districts and 110 public school academies across Wayne County.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Describe a specific initiative you've led that addressed educational inequities or closed opportunity gaps. What data or feedback informed your approach, and what were the results?
So, thank you for that question. So if I go back to my experience as a building level administrator, which is really where I learned to understand the equity conversation. So when I became an assistant principal, I recognized, so I was in a building that was about, just for some context, in a building that was about 70% free and reduced lunch. It was a middle school, about 950 students. We served an EI, self-contained categorical program. We served a SXI, severely cognitively impaired program. And we served a multitude of different communities, Wayne, Westland, Inkster, okay? Many of our students struggled with adverse childhood experiences. Many of our students qualified for free and reduced lunch. It could be a challenging environment from a behavioral perspective. And so I say all that to share, when I started as an assistant principal, I don't own this data, but I'm sharing this data. When I stepped in, and started looking at some of the data, there were 750 suspensions the year prior to my assuming the role as assistant principal. I was flabbergasted by that number. And as I began to dig into the data, what I learned quickly is that about 5% of the total 950 students made up about 40% of the suspensions. And it was largely children who came from poverty background, who were African American, who qualified for special education services. And that is what triggered a passion in me to study this question more deeply. And so what I wrote my dissertation on is this topic. The title of my dissertation is Socialization, Organizational Culture, and the Relationship to Student Suspension. I wanted to understand why in some contexts, when children come from marginalized environments and have experienced adverse childhood experiences, that there's somehow a mismatch with the culture of schools, which ultimately results in frequent suspension, expulsion, and ultimately ends up leading to dropout and incarceration. So I studied this question deeply, and it drove a lot of my passion in my work. So if I can fast forward now to Wayne Risa in terms of what I did, I was the chair of the School Justice Partnership. I had an opportunity to testify on a variety of bills related to how we discipline children. That contributed to some of the changes in law related to the 8 factors that must be considered now when we discipline children. It's actually written into the statute. I had the opportunity to testify regarding the importance of zero tolerance policies that can be really damaging to children. I had an opportunity to testify as it relates to, in some instances, restorative approaches can be impactful for children. Now, I'm not talking about, a child brings a gun to school, and look, like there are extreme situations that we have to take with the utmost severity. I will tell you, as a superintendent, I'm very mindful and strategic in terms of how we approach these questions at a local level. So that sort of paints the broad brush stroke big question and why I got to that point from an equity perspective, and then some of my experiences working specifically to advocate on behalf of students, especially with the legislature.
Next question. Could you please share with us a time you had to respond to a community or group that felt unheard or marginalized? How did you approach this scenario or situation, and what did you learn from it?
Let me count the ways. Um, so, honestly, I can think of several examples. I'll just focus on one most recently. So we recently, as a school community, adopted a strategic plan. We were very thoughtful in terms of how we approach that work. We brought in a third party, Plant Moran Real Point, to help us unpack some of our enrollment data. Our teaching learning technology department spent a lot of time digging into some of the educational research and really talking about the structures in our school day and how we might want to approach teaching and learning. And so for brevity purposes, I'll fast forward. It was a collaborative process. We had multiple stakeholders involved, including parents, community members, business leaders, township supervisors, and things such as that. As a byproduct of the strategic plan work, it became clear that we had too many buildings for the number of students that we had. Like so many other districts in the state of Michigan and nationally, we are seeing declining enrollment due to lower birth rates. And we were really thoughtful in terms of how we approached this question of building consolidation and redistricting, but we still, as you can imagine, had questions in the community. And so in order to be attentive to those questions and be partners with our community members, we did several key things. One, we created frequently asked questions documents that we made available. Every question that was asked was answered in an open and transparent way. We created a web page that produced every single community session that we had around the strategic plan. And when we arrived at the decision, we shared the presentations from Plant Moran Real Point as well as any presentations I did or that our teaching and learning technology department did, so that the community could go on and watch and hear the conversations, even if they weren't present. And then I would say most importantly, and this is true in every instance, when community members are unhappy, they just want to be heard. They just want to know that even if what they're asking for isn't going to happen, they just want to see you. They want to see that you care. They want to know that you're going to respond in a responsible manner and that maybe some of their thinking might be integrated into how the situation might proceed. So I went to different PTA groups and answered those questions, especially in the portion of the community that was most greatly impacted. I offered to go to homeowners association meetings in some of the subdivisions where community members were upset or unhappy. And then, many of our parents who are partners in this work were on the committee. And so they also were speaking out in support and helping the community know and understand. So I think it's just being available, listening, being transparent, putting as much information out there as possible.
Okay, I'm next. Describe a situation where your communication style helped resolve a conflict or build trust across a diverse group of stakeholders.
So when I started as a local superintendent, my first task was to ask our community to support a ballot proposal, two ballot proposals, one bond and one sinking fund on the same during the same election. So for context, our fund balance was about 5% when I started. So we're right on that lower end of the safe zone. We had not passed a bond as a community in over 20 years for infrastructure improvements. Our buildings were beginning to crumble. Literally, our parking lots were crumbling. The previous two ballot proposals failed. So my charge was to build an understanding and make deposits within the community in a relatively quick fashion to help garner support for this ballot proposal. And so I literally spent like my first 6 months, like I was at everything. And we put a committee together called the Building Futures Committee. It involved multiple stakeholder groups from throughout the community. Again, it involved elementary and secondary educators, administrators, business officials, and we developed together a partnership, a relationship, and a compelling why. You know, we ended up with a great understanding throughout our community regarding why this was so important. And I will tell you, we had a local legislator that had historically worked in opposition of supporting ballot proposals. And my goal was not to tell somebody how they should think, but to at least understand the why behind it. So I remember having breakfast with this individual, and my entire strategy was just stay neutral. just don't say anything, and let us at least ask the community, to support this initiative. And I'm pleased to report that we did pass that ballot proposal at a margin of almost 80%, which I was very proud of as superintendent, because we hadn't passed a ballot proposal in, as I mentioned, over 20 years. And since that time, those deposits, that goodwill, that transparent use of those taxpayer dollars resulted in us going out in 2024 and passing another bond for $363 million, the fourth largest qualified bond in the state history. And that just doesn't happen, definitely not in my community by accident. That happens when you have a community working together and recognizing the compelling why and getting out and supporting its local school district.
Well, you may have already answered this question just now, but let's just see what else, okay? So Michigan's political landscape is complex. Tell us about a time when you advanced an educational policy or initiative in a politically sensitive context.
Mm-hmm.
How did you build support while staying focused on students? Who was the opposition, and how did you work with them?
Yeah, so the answer I just gave, regarding the local legislator, I think is a great example of how we tackled that question. I make it a point. Look, here's my thing. So I read the leadership profile that HYA put together. This is not an easy job. A superintendent, especially at the Michigan Department of Education, has to lead with clarity of purpose, wisdom, credibility, honesty, integrity, transparency, and really largely through building partnerships and influence. I lived that as an ISD associate superintendent. I had no authority to really make anybody, quote unquote, make anybody do anything, right? I had to lead with a compelling why. And so the way you do that is by welcoming and accepting differences of opinion. And that's okay. It's actually good. It's actually healthy, because oftentimes what you find is you're able to build something that you didn't necessarily intend upon. I have 7 board members. They do not think the same. They do not have the same party affiliations, but we all focus on kids, the 8 of us. Any one of my board members will tell you that we're a team of 8. We work for the benefit of children. And I know that, what I took away from reading that HYA profile is the superintendent has to be politically savvy, but not political, if that makes sense.
I'd like to talk to you about foster care students. Currently, we had testimony, and we have kids that are in the foster care system that transcripts are not following them from school to school when they move from parent to parent or whatever, and so they can't graduate often because they can't prove that they took classes, and also the authority of the biological parents don't follow necessarily as well. So we have situations where the biological parents aren't allowed to know what's going on with their biological child. So I am asking you that if this board directs you to solve this issue within a reasonable time, whether it's dedicating a half-time person to be an ombudsman for foster care kids or whatever it is, that if this board directs you to do that, will you commit to doing it in a reasonable time?
Of course. I would ask, what's a reasonable time?
It would be determined at that point. I mean,
Sure.
I would certainly say, if kids are not for them, it's urgent. So,
Of course.
so I would just say, as urgently as we can.
Yes,
Yeah.
100%. I mean, in my mind, it's what resources do we have at MDE to help us solve that problem? What resources and partnerships can we align with our intermediate school districts, our 56 intermediate school districts? Let's triage the problem. Where is it most prevalent throughout the state? Let's target and contextualize our approach. And then, of course, how do we align and support local school districts that are challenged with this question even more so? When I was at the ISD, this would come up periodically. We would get questions regarding transcripts for children of foster care or transcripts for a child of a PSA that closed and they can't find where. So unfortunately, this is not a new challenge, but it is certainly, I agree, it's something that we need to tackle. And I think there's a systemic way we can partner and accomplish that goal.
Thank you.
Are you gonna ask question 8 or?
Oh, that was my question. Did you want me to ask question? You want me to ask that one also? Oh, okay. Could you give an example of how you built and sustained a successful partnership with a stakeholder group? Example, unions, families, tribal nations, legislators. What evidence can you share that made it successful?
So I've mentioned our district strategic plan. And that's a Huron Valley Schools example as a local superintendent. Let me switch gears here. I think this would be relevant, especially to the role of the MDE superintendent. So at the ISD, one of my charges was to support assistant superintendents and local superintendents. I was working with a team at the time when the third grade reading legislation was adopted, as well as educator evaluation laws. So, when you have to compel through influence, as opposed to direct responsibility, you learn rather quickly that the only way you accomplish that is to get multiple voices in the room and share experience with multiple individuals to help with the implementation design. So the only way to really get to the classroom is if you engage the locals. And so I'm really proud of the work we did at the ISD. I mean, we created a educator evaluation document that really was used as a model across the state for a number of years until just recently when the law was repealed, regarding how to measure student growth in particular in ways that made sense, that used the M step strategically, right? It wasn't just this compare third grade last year to third grade this year, right? Where you're comparing two totally different groups of students and aren't taking context into the fray or understanding. So we built that guidance document, and then the team and I had an opportunity to really travel the state, all the way to Marquette and Copper County, and talk with educators, in the UP regarding how to implement this educator evaluation law to impact the local school districts. And then the other example I would use is the third grade reading legislation, especially the individual reading intervention plans, developing guidance and tools that local school districts could utilize as they were supporting their teachers, and really drilling down to that fourth stair step I mentioned, the multi-tiered system of support, how we differentiate for students based upon their needs. So there's a couple of examples, and I may actually share others, from my current experience, but I think that's kind of different.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now, if you could describe a situation where you face significant resistance or criticism from an important stakeholder group, how did you handle it, and what principles guided your actions?
So I think COVID was a good example of that that I shared earlier. That was definitely a tumultuous circumstance. Um, I would also point to, school closings are very difficult. I have to be honest, so when we started to recognize in Huron Valley that enrollment trends did not match our current building utilization, I will tell you as a local superintendent, that's probably one of the most terrifying things you can do. I don't know if any of you have ever seen those board meetings where there's 1,000 people in an auditorium and they're all upset and angry about, a school closure. So that was difficult. I'm not going to say it wasn't difficult, because it was. However, I think that if you're really intentional about communication, you can mitigate some of the difficulties associated with school closure. So if I use that as an example, as I mentioned, we shared video, FAQs, and a lot of personal meetings to help mitigate some of those questions. Another, I would say, key ingredient to working through some of those difficulties with school closures was we did a town hall meeting. We, in that town hall, it was about 2 hours. We spent the first hour providing a high-level overview of the data and why we ultimately arrived at the conclusions that we arrived upon. And then finally, we took an hour of questions. So we set this up to take place in our Center for Performing Arts at one of our primary high schools. And, I didn't know what to expect. I felt like we had done a good job communicating. So, you could have 500 to 800. We had about 100 people who were in the audience. We had a series of questions, especially as it related to we were moving our alternative high school to a current middle school. We were repurposing the middle school, closing one of the middle schools and consolidating into 2 buildings and moving the alternative school. And the alternative school was located next to one of our elementary campuses. And so one of the questions we got was, you're going to move the alternative school next to the elementary kids? And it was like, yes, we are. And they're students. They just are in an alternative pathway. So helping the community know and understand the why behind the rationale behind those decisions was really important. And I'm happy to report, so while we did have questions and we did have a lot of face-to-face meetings, we didn't have a single public comment at a board meeting, which is just unheard of. going through a process like that. And we're not a small district. I mean, we're the 21st largest district in the state of Michigan. So to get to that point, I think it's just a testament to the work that our team did.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This is a question on literacy.
Okay.
The state of Michigan legislature has enacted a multifaceted literacy law, which is meant to directly assist children, particularly those in pre-K through third grade, with improving their literacy skills. Please share with us your impression and knowledge of these bills. And as state superintendent, how would you lead the department, the ISDs, RESAs, and local districts in implementing and monitoring the effects of these laws? Additionally, could you tell us what part, if any, you played in informing or providing support for these laws prior to their enactment?
Okay. Yes, of course. So I appreciate the question. It's an important one. I think we're all familiar with literacy achievement in the state of Michigan, especially post-pandemic. I mean, we've seen some pretty alarming negative trends that we have to get under control as a state. There's no question about that. And if I do not answer any aspect of this question, please redirect me, because there are a lot of parts to that. So from a literacy perspective in particular, what I see as one of our greatest challenges as a state, and it's not just literacy, it's other achievement areas as well, is fits and starts in terms of seeing through the initiatives. You know, I realize that literacy, a focus on literacy, is one of the state boards and MDE's top goals and initiatives. And in my review of the progress that has been made, certainly there's emphasis, but that's one goal that I know we still have quite a bit of work to do as a state. So when I was working with Wayne Risa, I was fortunate to be a part of the General Education Leadership Network, which is a branch of the Michigan Association of Intermediate School Districts. And I had the opportunity in that work to spend quite a bit of time, energy, and effort working to implement the Literacy Essentials. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Literacy Essentials, but it is a body of work that encompasses best practices and was used to drive the coaching model that we've heard a lot about in the state of Michigan. And it was funded for a period of time. So as we fast forward, many of the elements of science of reading are dovetailed within the Literacy Essentials. But what I would say is when COVID hit, there was largely an abandonment of that work. And so what we're seeing now with the legislature is important. I'm glad that there's a revitalization. It's important. But we did start the work. We started the work stopped because it had to, because we were all dealing with, the pandemic. And now there's a resurgence. And I like the resurgence. I mean, the focus on phonics, science of reading, letters training is all important. My direct impact on that legislation, I would say, is working through my ISD, the legislative committee. I serve as a board member on the K-12 Alliance, which is a group that works on legislative strategy. I offered input and feedback into that legislation throughout the process. I actually have a couple of board members that feel very strongly as it relates to the dyslexia aspects of the legislation. So I think we're making progress in the right direction. However, we have to continue to fund this literacy initiative. We cannot stop in a year from now because there's a different focus. You know, Michael Fullen talks about successful organizations, and what they do is they focus on a few rigorous goals, and they stay the course. Our 8 goals are the right goals. This literacy goal is the right goal, but we cannot go through this process of fits and starts. You know, when I was at the ISD, we recognized coaching was important. The legislature funded coaching. You know how many coaches we got at Wayne Risa for 280,000 kids? 3. That's not enough. That's not going to get the job done. So we need to go all in on these key initiatives. This partway effort is not going to get the job done.
May I ask a follow-up question? Okay. So in relationship to literacy, and since we're talking about what it looks like to actually fully implement, school funding in Michigan is one of the most difficult to understand models in the nation. Michigan residents have communicated frustration with understanding where money comes from, where it goes. $87 million were allocated for the literacy changes our state needs in the last budget. 550 school districts applied for those dollars. MDE approved local school district budgets and selected successful applicants for the entirety of those $87 million and released the list of districts. Do you support the required reporting of approved budgets for categoricals and grants to local citizens so they can see line item spending? I think that's a big part of what implementation looks like.
Yeah, I don't have any issues with transparency. Why not? It would be my response to that off the cuff. There's a practical side to that I think is difficult. So increased reporting requirements necessitates time, people, energy. I think that is the challenge that we ultimately, will deal with. I think the department did a wonderful job selecting the materials. I can tell you, Huron Valley Schools specifically questioned the selection of only one curriculi because we were in the process of actually piloting 2. And we were able to reach out and speak with Dr. Carnell, and she supported us. And they actually, the department changed some of the guidance to allow us to implement best practices in piloting materials. So, I know MDE is working very hard to try and accomplish all these goals, but sometimes reporting requirements can be burdensome and difficult. But generally speaking, I support transparency.
Are we ready to move on to the next? Okay. You need,
Thank you. I lost it on my screen. Leadership often involves acknowledging mistakes. Share an instance where you changed your mind based on new information or feedback. How did you communicate the change and what did you learn?
So one of the things I've learned as a leader over my career, and this was a mistake that I would say I made more often when I was a younger administrator, was making assumptions about what people thought or believed we should do in a particular case before I walked in the room to have the conversation. And after faltering in that space early on in my career, I learned never to make assumptions, always go into a room with an open mind and acknowledge that, hey, you know what, Paul? There's some smart people out there who are going to tell you things you don't know. And maybe there's another way, a smarter way to do something. An example of that would be, in my mind, when we were going through the process of redistricting, and I'm sharing redistricting because it's just fresh on my mind. We're actually implementing it, this school year, the changes. In my mind, we were doing that a year ago because it was going to be a savings to the general fund, which was ultimately dollars and cents that we could invest back into the classroom. The stakeholder group, the community, was not ready for that. And so in my mind, it was logical. Yeah, why wouldn't we save the dollars and cents to reinvest in classrooms? But then I had to remind myself that communities, like people, grieve change. They grieve loss. And the closure of a school is a loss. And giving the community an opportunity to work their way through the stages was really important. You know, William Bridges is the author of a book titled Managing Transitions, and he talks about the 3 phases of change. And the first is it's ending losing. It's like letting go of something. The second is the neutral zone, is where you're trying to figure out what it's going to look like moving forward. And the final is the actual new beginning. And oftentimes when people think of change, they think of ending, losing, new beginning. Let's move on. You know, you've got emotions, move on. It's fine. It doesn't work that way. So recognizing that we needed to spend some time defining what the new beginning was going to look like was really important. And so we stopped. We changed course. While it was in my mind that we needed to make those decisions and implement last school year, we waited a full year to give people an opportunity, and it was the right thing to do, 100%. We were able to utilize bond resources to help prepare buildings for larger school populations, and 100% the right call. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
How have you integrated the arts, mental health supports, or social emotional learning into the educational experience? And how do you define success beyond test scores?
That's a great question. So in Huron Valley, we pride ourselves on being what we call a AAA school district. We focus on the academics, on the arts, and athletics. We want to provide a well-rounded opportunity for all students based upon the interest that they have, because we know and recognize that in some instances, the arts or athletics are the primary reason that kiddos come to school. They love those aspects of our programs. So in Huron Valley, we actually hired what we call an arts coordinator. And that individual really helps us with aligning the Michigan state curriculum as it relates to the standards, but also extracurricular opportunities and programs from K through 12 to ensure that what we do in the arts is really intentional and that there isn't sort of duplication or things happening haphazardly. Our middle schools meet with our high schools, and there's a clear feeder path, and really focusing on supporting our elementaries as well to feed into our middle school program. So that would be my focus in terms of the arts. Mental health support, wow, what a topic, especially post-pandemic. We've seen significant challenges in terms of students struggling with mental health crises. Last school year, as we started the school year, I am not exaggerating, we had like 90 okay to say calls in the span of 2 months for suicide ideation, for mental health crises. And oftentimes we get those calls, at 11:30 at night, and we're, when that happens, we're waking up, we're contacting the Oakland County Sheriff, we're asking for a health visit to the home. And then all the way, to our kindergarten classrooms, children are struggling with the ability to self-regulate, self-soothe. We have not seen that to the degree that we're seeing it now in schools. So as a school district, we have tackled the mental health crisis by implementing a really robust positive behavior intervention support. We've used 31 AA monies to supplement our current social work allocations. In every one of our buildings, we have at least one social worker. In some instances, we have two, depending on the needs of that building. We doubled our PBIS paraeducator support to help create calming rooms and to help quickly redirect children that might be having a breakdown so that they can go back to the classroom so we don't have to send them home, because that is not helping them when we send them home. So, we've done a lot in that space as a school district. At the ISD, I mentioned the school justice partnership. We also had two nursing consultants and worked very closely on the health curriculum with the department to help with the implementation of those pieces. I really like the changes that have recently been made to the health standards, and I know we're implementing some of those standards this year in Huron Valley.
Thank you. Two-part question. If selected, if in the dual role of the state superintendent and the board chair, how would you ensure that all members' voices are heard and included in key decisions?
Yeah.
And after you answer that, then could you please share specific experiences or two where you successfully manage conflicts or concerns, issues among board members, or even yourself and a board member?
Sure. Great question. So I've never been a board chair, right? So I don't have experience in that space. I'm a quick read. I learn quickly. And that would certainly be something different for me as if I am fortunate enough to be named state superintendent. That would be different. I would have to learn and strike the right cadence. But I can tell you as a human being, what's important to me is that all voices have an opportunity to say their piece. I mentioned earlier, dissenting opinions is good. It's healthy. I would be deliberate in ensuring that each board member had an opportunity to speak regarding any number of topics that was important. Follow the appropriate processes as it relates to amendments for resolutions that might be voted upon, following the Robert's Rules of Order. But to me, it's really important that every board member has an opportunity to say their piece. You're all elected by the voters, every one of you. Your voice is here for a reason. It should be heard. It should be heard. Second, so two things. In terms of supporting multiple voices, when you really are a servant leader, when you believe your job is not to be, the leader, but to be a person that supports leaders so that you can multiply the effect and impact on an organization, you invite and welcome voices in the room. When I was at the ISD, there were a lot of strong opinions regarding any number of topics you might think of, because everybody was an expert and they had expertise in their specific area. So, I heard a lot from all the voices, and there would oftentimes be meetings where I would be working with 100 people at the same time, and I made sure everybody had a voice in that room. In terms of my local school board, very different opinions, different political affiliations, all focused on kids. We have sort of we have an understanding where I never surprise my board, And they do everything in their power to let me know if something is coming down the pike. And it's an understanding we have, and it's a mutual respect that we have for one another. There have been instances where we have study sessions, as an example, where I might be facilitating the conversation, and so operating as a board chair, if you will, without being the chair. And I am really intentional to make sure that each and every board member, Title IX was a topic of heavy discussion. And I was really deliberate. We brought an attorney in closed session. We wanted the board to hear the changes in the law and understanding of Title IX. And then I facilitated the conversation as it related to implementation across the district from a policy perspective, and made sure that every board member had an opportunity to share their opinions. And there were dissenting opinions in terms of how that policy should be implemented. But we left and everybody had an opportunity to say their piece. And it wasn't a 7-0 vote, and that's okay.
All right, strategic priorities. As soon as I find the question again, there it is. Having reviewed our strategic plan, that is Michigan's strategic plan, please share what you believe are the 3 top priorities and tell us how you will energize both internal and external stakeholders to achieve them. Are there any other priorities that we should consider if we decide to review and revise that current plan?
So the 8 goals are the right goals. I believe that wholeheartedly. And I can walk through each one of them and I can tell you why I believe they're the right goals. But you're asking me specifically which 3 would be an area of focus for me. So I have 3, but then tangentially, I have another piece that I think is absolutely critical for us as we move forward as a state. One is literacy. Having reviewed several presentations over the last year of board meetings, it's very clear we've made progress in, I would say, 6 of the 8 goals. The 2 where I think there's still a lot that remains to be desired is literacy. And I do think we're making progress, but the data is just not there. So that has to be a focus for us. And the second is funding. I mentioned earlier in my interview the fits and starts as it relates to literacy implementation in the state and why I believe that has contributed to some of our challenges. The same is true as it relates to funding. We've had a couple of record years of investment in schools, which is outstanding, and I applaud the legislature and I applaud the governor for those efforts. But when you look at states that have made improvements in achievement, it wasn't 1 or 2 years. It was like 20 years. We're often compared to Massachusetts. Massachusetts identified their few goals 20 years ago, and it took them 13 to start seeing progress. And they fund their schools at $8,500 more per pupil than Michigan does right now. So we can't have this conversation without talking about funding and without talking about how we're going to fund schools equitably, which means, yes, some schools get more than others because there are greater needs in those environments, and we should target and contextualize our supports for children in those schools. So literacy, funding, and then my third, even though I would say it's not a distant third, but it's third out of the 3, would be a teacher shortage. When you look at John Hattie's work and what it says about teacher efficacy, the greatest impact on the classroom is a skilled educator. If people do not want to go into the profession and we have a teacher shortage and we can't find teachers for rural environments, we can't find teachers in special education classrooms, then It's the culture, climate, people, systems. It's the first stair step. If we don't have it, we aren't going to see the outcomes on the literacy side of things. So those are my three. But then my tangential piece, which I think encompasses all of it, it's the way with which we as a department partner with ISDs to support and partner with local school districts. How we implement that core supplemental and intensive model to wrap around our supports for local school districts. And the only way that I think we can do that, it looks different in Wayne County than it does in Traverse Bay, than it does in the UP, is if I were fortunate to be named state superintendent, I would be having conversations with those ISDs regularly regarding what do you need? How can we support you to make this happen? Because there are deserts across the state where certain aspects of the curricular programming and staffing is not pervasive. CTE is another area where there are CTE deserts, if you will, in certain parts of the state that we need to target our supports.
Okay, I'm next. I'm just making a final note here. Okay. Question 15 is on self-reflection. How would you ultimately establish your credibility to be the leader of public education in our state?
I think the most important thing that a leader can do is listen deeply, incorporate the thinking of those around them, work collaboratively, and celebrate the successes, but giving the credit to everyone else. That to me is critical to being a servant leader. I remember when we passed our last bond and I came into a secondary principal meeting and I was just, giving a lot of love to our secondary principals for all the efforts that they made. And one of the principals pulled me aside afterward and they said, "You did so much heavy lifting on this. Why are you giving us credit?" I'm like, because this is not about me. This is about what we accomplished. And you guys are the face of the community. Parents know you better than they know me as superintendent. Yeah, I'm out and about, but they're seeing you on a daily basis. So I think those are the key elements. Did I get everything there? Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Paul, currently there are videos out there connected with MDE instructing teachers and administrators how to hide in their computer systems and report cards, and also how to hide from teachers at teacher-parent conferences the use of alternate pronouns, alternate names, whether their kids are going to different bathrooms than their biological gender in locker rooms. And even during 2022, in the governor's election, Governor Whitmer condemned these and said that they should stop. But our current superintendent has defended this. And I've even met former kindergarten teachers in Lansing who said they were instructed in kindergarten to ask, what gender do you want, what name do you want to these little kindergartners, and to hide it from their parents. And so they quit. So my question to you is, will you work to stop these and any other efforts to deceive or withhold very important, including mental health important, but very important issues from parents, Will you work to?
Before you answer that, Senator Bullock, can you ask the question?
Ask for a point of order, but
Okay.
I'll.
Okay. Tom, can you ask the question that's there that we will ask of all the
I was
the
elected by
candidates?
2 million people last November, and this is a very important question, maybe critical to very many people in this state.
You can add it on Um,
I'm not being, you can't tell me what, I'm gonna ask the questions I feel is important.
you've asked
And
the
this is the
question, Senator
question.
Bullock, will you ask question number 16 for the
you're not
candidate
gonna-
to answer? No.
You've This is a joke.
So the question that we're asking,
I'm being silenced? Are you serious? I can't ask a question? This is the most important thing that we do as a board that I was elected to do, and you're not gonna let me ask a question?
You're not, we're not.
share with us your experience in dealing with IDEA federal legislation as it relates to requirements that are mandated not only for the state, but also for ISDs, RESAs, and local districts. Please share with us how you would work with parents, students, administrators, and staff as challenges arise with interpretation and implementation of federal and state requirements. Additionally, please share any examples you have regarding controversial interpretations regarding students with disabilities that you have been able to assist in solving.
So IDEA, federal and state requirements, and then interpretation of supporting students with disabilities? Is that
So share with us your experience in dealing with the IDEA federal legislation as it relates to requirements that are mandated not only for the state, but also the ISDs, RESAs, and local districts. And share with us how you would work with the parents, students, administrators, and staff as challenges arise with the interpretation and implementation of those federal and state requirements. And in addition, give us some examples.
Okay. So specifically as it relates to students with disabilities, I mentioned, some of my background. I was actually a special education teacher. I did my student teaching, 26 years ago in Lincoln Park schools. I worked with students with visual impairment, as well as my first job was as a teacher, working with emotionally impaired and learning disabled children in the Wayne Westland Community Schools. And then as a principal, I had several self-contained programs as well. So very familiar with how to develop a successful IEP with IEP goals, how to work with families to ensure that the needs of a child are contextualized and that we meet the individual needs of each and every child that we serve. IDEA, every year when we talk about our legislative strategies, IDEA is included as a topic of discussion because it remains grossly underfunded. Huron Valley Schools alone uses about $3 million in general fund to supplement the shortcomings in federal funding to support IDEA dollars. From a legal, ethical, moral perspective, not only just a best practice perspective in providing FAPE and least restrictive environment for students, I am going to uphold the law and provide services that they are entitled to as a result of a disability, including a 504 plan. And I've had several instances where I have worked with parents of children with disabilities. And in some instances, those conversations are successful and we all leave with a common understanding regarding what a child needs. And then in other instances, what is being asked for is not permissible and or, impossible. I can think of an example where a parent who loves her child dearly, advocating for her child, but wanted us to duplicate a program that already existed, that we provided transportation for, but wanted us to duplicate it on, on the other side of the district. And our district is 100 square miles, so it's very difficult sometimes to duplicate some of those efforts. So, going back to my comment earlier, listening to parents, trying to problem solve to meet the needs of their child, integrating their thinking and ideas into the IEP, all critical aspects, but we definitely need the feds to step up as it relates to IDEA funding. We are nowhere near where we should be, even though we've made progress in that space.
May I ask a follow-up question? Um, Part of this discussion that we've come across at the board table, and I believe we all care about improving special education in Michigan. And regardless of knowledge of or engagement with the issue of the federal government investigating the state of Michigan for compensatory services during COVID, we can all at least recognize that there is an issue. I believe the key word of interpretation in this question is extremely important. Former Governor John Engler removed the approval of MARS rules, and I just want to pause for a moment there. And MARS rules are Michigan administrative rules for special education. And the federal government, when they said IDEA is something we value, that special needs kids deserve a free, fair, and appropriate education just like the rest of us. So those MARS rules are up to each individual state to create and implement. So historically, the State Board of Education approved MARS rules, and John Engler removed the State Board of Education during his tenure from approving those and editing, if you will, those MARS rules, which dramatically impacts the concept of interpretation and implementation. I would say, and just to be, fair, I don't think that he intended this, but it has been proven to be disastrous long-term in the provision of special education services for Michigan students. One of my most direct questions in this topic after so much deliberation over time is, would you commit to helping to return the approval of MARS rules to the State Board of Education, as we are the constitutional elected body to oversee this?
I remember when Governor Engler was governor, and that is a question of governance that I've heard discussed a number of times at this board table. I've read some of the comments from Dr. Pugh. I completely agree. I've read Mr. McMillan's comments regarding, the intention of the framers of the Constitution. I believe that the State Board of Education should be in charge of ed policy. Yes, I would support the state board and helping to accomplish that and defining clearly the powers that should be invested in this Board of Education. The framers of the Constitution believed in checks and balances. I believe the framers of the Michigan Constitution believed in checks and balances. That's why we have, a governor, a House, a Senate. That forces collaboration. I believe that should be the case.
And then just one more thing from the perspective of, I know that Tom was trying to address a topic. I don't think it hurts for you to take the opportunity to answer it the best you can.
So I don't have an issue answering the question. I'm very comfortable doing that if the chair is comfortable with me doing that.
Go on the record for saying it's out of order, but
I get two questions. That's one of my two questions. It's not out of order.
no.
I get two questions.
No, there's a decorum and a format, and we're gonna
No,
follow it.
I have to ask two questions, and that's one of them. Simple.
I'm fine.
It's an add-on question.
Okay.
If it's a follow-up to one of the questions that's relevant to one of the questions that we've asked.
No, this is my question, one of my two questions that I'm going to ask of all candidates.
It's a road question.
If it's not is it a question that's relevant to one of the questions that we've asked?
It's relevant to me fulfilling my duty, but the 2 million people voted me to do, to select the next state superintendent. And I get two questions, and if you try to silence me on one of them, I think the people would have a big problem with that, especially when we're talking about deceiving parents and the district and the system's deceiving parents. I think it's a very important question.
Board Member McMillan, I will ask one more time if it's a question that is germane or relates to one of the questions that was asked.
It's one of my two questions, and it's about
So you're adding on your own questions. Thank you. We appreciate you coming before us, and we will be reaching out to you to let you know
gotta
what
be
the
kidding
next
me.
steps are.
He wants to answer the question. Go ahead and let him.
We thank you for coming to the
Oh
table,
my
and
God.
thank you for interviewing. We appreciate you.
Unbelievable.
Okay. That was kind of an abrupt way to end. Mr. McMillan, I'm sure we will have other conversations in the future, at least I hope so, and we can talk through that question amongst others. But I want to just thank the board for the opportunity to be here with you. I'm happy to answer any follow-up questions that you have, if you have any. I want to be respectful of the process, and I want to be respectful of the chair in managing the process. So thank you all very much. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salah. And you can come to the table, and yes, Dr. Collins, and we'll just
Appreciate it. Yep. Thank you.
give some further
Appreciate it.
instructions. Thank you so much.
Sorry, my hands are- Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks again, Dr. Salah, and you will hear from a member of HYA tomorrow. So just making sure that we're clear on what we're doing here. We want to make sure that we are respectful of each of the candidates that come before us. We've had ample time to review the questions and to add on or make additions to, and we have board members that did that. What we will do is stick to what we've agreed to as a
I didn't
board
agree
and the
to it.
process.
I did not agree
And
to
if
it.
you did not agree, then we're adults here.
Majority tramples on the minority. That's what's happening here.
And I did not
Fulfill
receive,
my duty as a state board member.
and I did not receive any responses, requests for adjustments from anyone except for one board member. And what I will say is that we will ask the questions that are here so that we're respectful of each of the candidates, that we're consistent. Tell me if I'm saying anything wrong, Dr. Collins. You do this as a living. And we will also allow board members to ask additional questions, follow-up questions that are related to the questions here. If they fit in, by all means, please add an additional question. Thank you, Board Member Snyder, for doing that in an orderly way. We will break here. We have a little bit of time, and maybe you can catch Dr. Salah and get your question answered, Board Member McMillan. But thank you, and if there's anything else
I want it on
that
the
you want.
record in public. That's what the public wants.
And so we will take a break and we will be back. We'll have a little bit of time, so we'll be back here at 11:30. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, Dr.
You said it
Collins.
very well,
Oh.
so thank you so much, and we will, I understand, break until it's time for the next candidate to come in. So thank you.
Thank you.